You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I'm speaking with you not far from the very spot that suffered the attack on Halloween, the new assault, tragic loss of 8 lives and 11 seriously wounded. But the news isn't all bad, because ever resilient New Yorkers followed that up with the most splendiferous Halloween parade ever, celebrating the oldest holiday on the planet. Halloween, which was originally Samhain, a harvest feast, and the Wiccan New Year. And, it's that time of year when there's a little bit of a snap in the air, a little chill, and it seems to give a bit more energy. And it seems that is quickening the pace of the Mueller investigation as well. So perhaps the fall is not just the season, but also the fall of the Trump regime. Certainly we would be doing everything we can to help bring that about. But we have a great show for you today. We're going to be talking about the greatest single consciousness-raising event in history with Dr. Jocelyn Olcott. That's her new book. And we're going to be speaking with our special correspondent for South Asia, Shazia Rafi, about that benighted, misrepresented, suffering part of the world that has given the planet so much and of which is expected these days so little. India, Pakistan, Iran, and all of the demonized countries therein. God has helped them, because Trump is setting out for a visit to Asia. However, before we get into any of that, and a few laughs along the way, we need to go inside the headlines. They were mostly tourists from Argentina, from Belgium, come to visit the Empire City in time for world-famous Commedia dell'arte exercise in street theater, the Halloween parade. But death, not in the form of floats or balloons or costumes, awaited them in the first major attack on the city since 9/11, costing 8 deaths and 11 serious woundings. Donald Trump, who really is to politics what Bernie Madoff was to investment, a huckster selling something people cannot admit they don't grasp in order to feed some purpose they cannot admit they don't have, well, Trump managed unerringly to get it wrong yet again. He barely could read the statement that was put before him. He was interestingly unable to pronounce the word diversity in describing the diversity visa lottery through which the attacker had come to the United States in 2010 from Uzbekistan, a white country full of white Europeans, by the way, which Trump didn't mention. He then managed to attack one of the New York senators in the wake of an attack against New York. Great work, Donald. You make even George W. Bush after 9/11 look wonderful. And this, just in passing, since I spent so much time last week on the now we realize odious General John Kelly, Trump's chief of staff. He made a further ass of himself this week on Fox News by calling Robert E. Lee an honorable man, saying that the Civil War was fought because of an inability to compromise, and stating that he thought it unfair to impose today's standards of right and wrong backward on the past when they had different standards then. So, just in passing, 1. Robert E. Lee was a traitor to his country, not an honorable man. 2. Just what compromise would you suggest regarding the obscenity of slavery? Also, are you aware, you dummy, that the Constitution itself was a compromise on the subject, or else the South wouldn't have joined the Union to begin with? 3. As for imposing today's standards backward, you pathetic ignoramus, what do you do then about people like Annie Kinloch Lee, General Lee's own sister, who was a strong Unionist and who refused to speak to her brother or reply to any of his letters for the remainder of her life once he declared for the Confederacy? What do you do, for that matter, about, Lincoln and Grant, also a general? What do you do about all the black Southerners and all of the black and white Northerners whose standards of yesterday somehow managed to get it right, That is, they were able to fathom that slavery was a scar on this nation that would remain for generations. You have now forfeited any chance for respect, Kelly, though it's now clear and frightening to see why Trump trusts you, you historically uninformed, bigoted tin soldier. Back in D.C., Trump's boy, who now heads the Environmental Protection Agency, Scott Pruitt, fired half a dozen scientists and academics from their advisory positions last Tuesday, effectively barring many experts in fields ranging from toxicology to epidemiology, keeping them from advising the EPA on scientific matters. Pruitt framed the firings in terms of politicizing science, saying no one who had ever received a grant should ever serve, which is literally impossible, since the EPA is one of the largest funders of environmental research. Instead, Pruitt announced he was going to appoint several industry representatives to the panels without restrictions, nothing to prevent them from offering advice on the environmental regulations that would affect their businesses. That, you understand, is not political. Get it? We want to ensure independence, he said, and I will pause here so that you can catch your breath from gales of furious laughter. And the heat goes on and on. The sexual harassment eruption in Hollywood has spread across borders of states and nations and industries. Let's keep it going. There's safety in numbers. In the United Kingdom, both the BBC and the Parliament, the mother of all parliaments, as it's called, are being upended by reports of everything from harassment to outright assault, as is the tech world, not least with Silicon Valley's Robert Scoble. Amazon executive Roy Price has been forced to resign, Nickelodeon producer Chris Savino, Vox Media's Lockhart Steele, and Defy Media's Andy Sigior, as well as filmmaker James Toback, celebrity chef John Best, celebrity photographer Terry Richardson, and Fidelity stockbroker Gavin Baker. They've all been trying to fast footwork squirm out of accusations. 3 Dartmouth professors have been suspended, but with pay, which I, for one, find discomfiting. Mark Halperin, formerly of ABC and recently with MSNBC, has been let go. Bob Weinstein, brother of the infamous Harvey, fell under scrutiny for similar behavior as that of his brother. Slowly but inevitably, the den of sexual harassment that is the United Nations is sliding into view. And expectedly, the accusations have spilled over into other areas. Kevin Spacey, accused of assaulting a 14-year-old actor, responded in a manner that was unfortunate and seemed to conflate that behavior with coming out as gay. And it continues. French feminist groups protested at the opening of a Paris retrospective honoring the work of director Roman Polanski, wanted in the United States for sexual abuse of minors, and now fielding new accusations from more women. An online petition signed by more than 28,000 people criticized the timing of the retrospective tribute, but unfortunately the great director and head of the Cinematheque, Costa Gavras, responded by saying that it was not the Institute's place to act as an arbiter of morality. This is criminal behavior. Leave morality aside. And speaking of criminal behavior, a glance at the Robert Mueller special counsel indictments. No dummy, Robert Mueller. He showed both a carrot and stick in making public the heavy charges against Paul Manafort and in making public the guilty plea with cooperation by George Papadopoulos. Whee! Now we don't have to wake up every morning only to news of El Moron's latest tweets. We can wake up with the expectation of more goodies like this to come from Bob Mueller. The tech giants Facebook, Google, and Twitter testified before Congress disingenuously this week, but more about that later on in Fighting Words. I want to save time here to remember stories that are not in the headlines anymore, although the suffering goes on inside those headlines. Many of the Chibok girls are still missing, and those who have been released or rescued still face agony, ostracizing by their own villages, lifelong trauma flashbacks of abduction, rape, and enslavement. They also face the task of raising children who wear the features of their rapists. Flint, Michigan children are still suffering from leaded water, as are pregnant women there who spontaneously aborted or who experienced rising stillbirths. The aftermath of climate change created disasters trails all the way back to New Orleans and Katrina and continues in Houston and in Florida, and right this minute is ongoing in California's ashes and in Puerto Rico's floods. The chaos, the loss, the resolve, the rage, the rebuilding, the betrayal by FEMA. The grief goes on, too, in the continuing aftermath of all the shootings in this country, from Sandy Hook and earlier, through Orlando, right up to today. The wounds that run fresh blood each birthday without a particular child not here to celebrate, without a particular lover murdered by the gun industry, greed, and politicians' corruptions. We can't let yesterday's stories vanish, not while the suffering still is acute and persists. The least we can do is remember, and put that remembrance toward action. It's time for a short break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, but I'll be right back to talk about the greatest single consciousness-raising event in history. And if you're curious as to what that is, stick with us. That's coming right up.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome back again. Dr. Jocelyn Olcott is Associate Professor of History and Gender, Sexuality, and Feminist Studies at Duke University. She's the editor of Sex in Revolution, Gender, Politics, and Power in Modern Mexico, and she's a co-editor of the Hispanic American Historical Review. Her first book, Revolutionary Women in Post-Revolutionary Mexico, explores questions of gender and citizenship in the 1930s. Her second book, the one we're here to talk about today, is called International Women's Year, the greatest consciousness-raising event in history, and it considers the history and legacies of the United Nations First World Conference on Women in 1975 in Mexico City. That came out this year with Oxford University Press, and I'm delighted to welcome Dr. Jocelyn Olcott. Jocelyn Olcott, welcome to Women's Media Center Live.
Thank you so much. It's truly an honor to speak with you.
Thank you for this book. This is quite a trip down memory lane for some of us. International Women's Year, the greatest consciousness-raising event in history, referring to the United Nations International Women's Year conference in 1975. I remember we were cranky at the time. I remember saying, "Whoa, terrific! Men get history, and we get a year. We're not settling for a year. We're moving on from there." But it was an extraordinary start. Tell us about it, and tell us about how the book came to be written, because it's a first. I don't think anybody has at all taken on IWY in the extraordinary depth and detail that you have.
Yeah, it came to be written because it's the first. I actually set out to write a totally different book, and I thought as part of that I would just review the secondary literature on this conference. And I assumed, because I had been hearing about this conference for so many years, I work on Latin America, and so I'd heard about it in part from that perspective, but also because I write feminist history, I'd heard about it from a feminist perspective. And since everyone references it as this major turning point, I thought, I'll just look at the secondary literature and I'll go from there. And I really found that there was no historical literature on it. What exists about this conference is some stuff from participants and some writings from journalists, particularly Peggy Simpson, the wonderful Associated Press reporter. Yes. And those are all really valuable, but they are, of course, particular perspectives. They're not right. Based on broader research. And so I started digging around, and I actually thought that it's a 2-week conference. How long can this take?
Right.
That I would just dash out a quickie article about it. And the more I got into it, I just realized that it, not only that it deserved a book, but that it needed to have that scale of inquiry. It really started as a kind of a Cold War gambit. There was a Soviet-aligned non-governmental organization, or NGO, called the Women's International Democratic Federation.
Right.
And they were going to be having their 30th anniversary, and so they thought, well, they were going to have a big conference anyway. They had one every 5 years, and so it was a little bit of a ploy. We're going to declare this International Women's Year, and it'll be the year of our big conference. And so it was kind of an effort on their part to put themselves a little bit center stage, and they approached some representatives at the UN, and it got pushed through. And the United States had completely ignored all of this. I mean, it was Kissinger's State Department. They really were completely uninterested in women's issues. And so when the State Department got wind of the idea that this was going to be this big UN event and that the conference was going to take place in East Berlin, they suddenly became quite interested in International Women's Year. And I think it's in part because, this is also the time when the Soviet Union had really kind of embarrassed the United States about civil rights and racism, and was making that a global issue. Right. And what's often referred to in the scholarship as the Cold War civil rights era. And this was clearly a play to say, the so-called Second World, the Soviet bloc countries have made all this progress on women's issues that you haven't made. Right. And so trying to kind of show up the United States. So it's interestingly a moment when feminism and women's rights became a kind of arena for Cold War conflict. And that's part of how this conference comes about.
Right. That was precisely the way that you put the reasoning of the time was one reason that I better say this up front, listeners, I did not go, as you may have discovered, because I see from various footnotes and references that you've been rustling around in my papers since at the Sally...
Reading your mail.
Reading my mail at the Sally Bingham Center for Women's History and Culture. And I had correspondence, of course, with many friends and colleagues and sisters who did go. But, of course, I had come out with Sisterhood is Powerful a few years before, and I'd already begun it was more than a twinkle in my eye. I had embarked on Sisterhood is Global, which would take, my God, it wouldn't come out till 1984. But I was already deeply enamored of and enmeshed in the global women's movement, and I was very much afraid. I mean, I was very used to earning my stripes of trust, that one had to overcome a kind of immediate, side glance of, oh, you're an American, because I wanted to wear a sandwich board saying, listen, the CIA has files on me too. So, and I had earned that trust and was very, very proud of earning that trust. And I worried tremendously that Mexico City would turn into a sort of be weaponized by the U.S. government. Name the ways you think that it's been stereotyped or regarded in general in people's minds.
The story that we most often tell ourselves is that Mexico City was pretty much a failure because people didn't unify around a single program. And what I found, and maybe this is just because you can see it with the hindsight of history, is that the most enduring things that came out of that conference, there was a space created in which conflict could take place and was even invited in some ways. And that friction really was quite generative. And so some of the most enduring things that we have from that, and in part, it comes out of reaction to it. There's this wonderful moment. There's an Indian economist named Devaki Jain who...
yes, indeed.
who's marvelous, yes. And who was pretty young in 75, but she was there in 75, and she's now written a book about women in the UN, and she's just a formidable presence in the world. But she, after these conferences, started an organization called DAWN, which is Development Alternatives for Women for a New Era. It's a great acronym, but it's kind of a clunky name. Anyway, she has this, when she's describing why they decided to create Dawn, she said, we would go to these conferences and all of these women would treat us like we were, they would, like the phrase she used was, you third world punks, you're always disrupting things and whatever. And it was in part a sense that of having been seen as disruptors that they started to create these networks. Similarly, the Latin American feminist encounters emerged from this. And so those networks, which really have, as you know, better than anyone really, have just redefined feminism for us, emerged from the conflict of this conference, not from the unity.
Yes, totally. Devaki, in fact, wrote the piece on India in Sisterhood is Global, and Peggy Antrobus of the Caribbean, wonderful Peggy Antrobus, was another leading force of energy behind Dawn, and still is active today. And so a lot of those women came out of that conference or went to that conference hoping to create an agenda, which in fact they did, and which has, in terms of issues, solidarity, sheer numbers, communication, educating the global North feminists, and I would say leadership of the global women's movement. It has moved to the global South, and I find that a cause for great celebration.
The education really did go both ways, though. By 1985, those women organized from the Third World, they had reshaped feminism as their own. And that's a critical development.
And the energy, while we're fighting to stay in place in this country, for example, the energy around the world is just unstoppable. I mean, you saw it in the Women's March.
Yeah. I mean, I do think that one thing that women from the United States had not learned in 1975, but I think learned in Mexico City and certainly have learned over the years, is that we don't get to decide what's legitimate feminism, right?
You think? Yeah.
And so when you look at the success of the Women's March, I think that is in part, it had it remained what it started out, and it's very, it's beginning imaginings. I think no one thought it could become the largest march in the history of this country, right? But what made it that was that it really invited all of these different conceptions of what feminism can be.
And I do think there's a direct line which you traced from the IWY conference to that moment that just can't be stopped. I have been referring to feminism as either a multiplicity of feminism or feminisms, plural, for about 20 years, because I think that reflects more the reality,
Yeah.
Anyway, you have done a scholarly and lively and accessible and terrific job here. The book's called International Women's Year, the greatest consciousness-raising event in history, and we've been talking with the author, Jocelyn Olcott, who is a scholar but also a damn good writer. Thank you, Jocelyn.
Thank you so much.
And guess what? Yep, it's time for the Surrealism Corner. Emily Nash, a junior at the Lunenburg High School in Lunenburg, Massachusetts, was allowed to play in the Massachusetts Golf Association Junior Amateur Championship. She just wasn't allowed to win. You heard me. The first place trophy was awarded to a boy who was 4 strokes behind her because of the rules of the tournament. According to the Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association, girls can play in the boys' golf tournament as part of a team, but they're not allowed entry as individuals. Oh, we wouldn't want that. This means that Emily does not get a trophy or a spot in the boys' state championship. This was a surprise to her, although her coach was aware of the rule. Already impressively gifted in understatement, Emily said, quote, "I feel like it's a bit unfair," close quote. Lunenburg High School doesn't have a girls' golf team, and the boys' team, despite the boost from Emily's performance, failed to qualify for a spot at state level. This is so patently stupid that I'm not sure it even qualifies as surreal. A tech conference is defending its decision to invite a convicted woman-beater to speak. Silicon Valley executive Gurbaksh Chahel, Chahel, He spoke at Coin Agenda. That's a Las Vegas conference on cryptocurrencies. That was back at the end of October. He was caught on video hitting and kicking his girlfriend 117 times and smothering her with a pillow, all in the space of 30 minutes in 2013. Chahal pled guilty to 2 misdemeanors, but later violated his probation by beating a different woman. He now faces a year in prison pending an appeal. He's also facing at least 4 lawsuits from former employees who accused him of racism, frequently using the N-word, of sexism, and of threats of violence. Coin Agenda's founder, Michael Turpin, said none of this is a reason to exclude Chahal from speaking on a panel at the conference. I don't support domestic violence, Turpin tweeted, but I also don't believe in lifetime bans on a businessman speaking about his business. Close quote. Well, if any of you out there have an extra moment to let Coin Agenda know what you think this might cost them about this attitude, fling them a tweet. Now, I could do the entire hour just on the Mueller indictment against Paul Manafort, but I will restrict myself to a surreal tidbit. Okay. On pages 7 through 14, there is a list of dozens of payments that overseas companies allegedly owned or controlled by Manafort and his associate Rick Gates made to several businesses in the U.S. Starting in 2008, the two guys made routine payments, often every other week, sometimes every other month, to the same small companies and group of companies. An unnamed home improvement business in the Hamptons, a home automation company in Florida, an antique rug store in Alexandria, Virginia, and so forth. Now, supposedly these payments were for personal purchases, which is where, to me at least, it gets hilariously surreal. I mean, clearly I have a limited imagination, but it's really hard for me to fathom how a person can spend $12 million over 6 years while only shopping at a handful of stores, and almost always happens to be billed in sums that end in multiple zeros. 107,000, 7,000, then 20,000, then 250,000, then 32,000, 15,000, 24,000 at a New York men's store, a clothing store. That's a lot of clothes, even if it's all by the best designers. And that's a lot of home automation, even if the walls sing and dance. Well, apparently Mr. Mueller also thought it extremely rare for even a single purchase to end in 3 zeros, and he also figured that an even more glaring red alert was that the payments all came from businesses in Cyprus, controlled by Manafort and or Gates. Then, in February and March of 2013, the funds stopped coming from Cyprus and began to flow from accounts in the Grenadines. This just happened coincidentally to be right at the time that the global accounting firm Deloitte published a report on behalf of the Council of Europe detailing naked criminality in the banking system of Cyprus and heralding a crackdown on money laundering from there. What do you know? The stunner is that Manafort was so brazen. Then again, without the Mueller investigation into possible collusion between the Russian government and the Trump campaign, Manafort would probably never have been caught. Why then did he let himself get involved? Greed for even more money? Debt to the Russians in some way we don't yet know? My vote is for hubris, the ancient Greek concept about arrogance, an arrogance that lets you think just because you've gotten away with something once, or even twice, you can surely get away with it again and again. When all else fails, as the Greeks knew, hubris can bring you down. Nor is money laundering in itself something that doesn't affect average people like you and me. After all, it transfers wealth from tax-funded democracies away, and it funnels money instead toward kleptocracies. It rewards crime, and it punishes legitimate businesses. Now, maybe, probably not, but maybe this scandal will have a chilling effect on global criminals in feeling that they should be more nervous about the illicit transfer of their money around the globe. I mean, let's also not forget that Manafort has been all along a player in the Republican Party circles, the high ones. He was recommended by the RNC. As for me, I'm still having trouble figuring out how you can spend so much money on antique rugs, even if they are all Killims. And then this last item just takes your breath away with its sheer stupidity. Anne Frank's memory continues to have a great symbolic power around the world, especially in Germany for good reason. Her name has been used for streets, schools, and parks. But this latest development was a new low in insensitivity. 73 years after she was forced from hiding and crammed into a cattle wagon on a train bound for Auschwitz to her death, Deutsche Bahn, Germany's state rail operation, recently announced it was going to name a high-speed train after her. Honest to God, a train. High speed, yet get her there faster. Deutsche Bahn was created in its modern form in 1994, consolidating state railway companies from the former East and West Germany, but its predecessor during the Nazi era, the Deutsche Reichsbahn, deported millions of Jews to their deaths. So some dim bulb at Germany's state railway comes up with an idea. Hey, why not name a high-speed train after the single most famous tragic passenger who ever rode a German train to her death? You know, debate continues as to whether Germany has yet or ever will be able to expiate its actions in the 20th century, has yet or will ever be able to rid itself of the consciousness of guilt. With this decision currently under reconsideration, you think? The answer has to be, not yet, not enough, far too surreal. It's time for another short pause here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I'll return directly with Shazia Rafi, our wonderful correspondent for South Asia, to bring us up to speed on the volatile region of India, Pakistan, Iran, and the environs. So don't go away.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again, this time with Shazia Rafi, our redoubtable correspondent for South Asia. Shazia was Secretary General from 1996 to 2013 of Parliamentarians for Global Action, and she transformed that organization into an influential player in diplomacy and development. She's a consultant. She's a journalist covering South Asian politics and women's empowerment from women's publications such as Ms. and the Women's Media Center, and for general publications as well. She's a speaker on leadership at conferences and an advisor to university programs, but she is our special correspondent for South Asia, and I'm always delighted to welcome her back to the program because we learned so much from Shazia Rafi. Shazia, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Robin. Good to be back.
Well, we need your wisdom and your reporting on not only Pakistan, but on the Trump regime's attitude toward the region, which is even worse than anybody's attitude was before the region, and that wasn't good. So take it away and update us, please.
Sure. So I'm going to talk about Southwest Asia, which is focused more on really Pakistan, Afghanistan, and to a lesser extent, parts that flow into Iran. Essentially, you've got, we've been involved as part of NATO, but leading NATO in this war in this region since 2001.
Yes.
To oust the Taliban from Afghanistan, which then led to the Taliban in Pakistan because they crossed the mountains,
right.
And which is still a region that is embroiled in both this war on terror. It is also embroiled in now domestic terrorism, which is affecting the economies. At the same time, there is good news too. Women are going to school. Women are, back at work, etc. in Afghanistan. And in Pakistan, they've always been at school or at work, but they are still part of the economy, but struggling now with more Talibanization on that side of the border. Mm-hmm. So I kind of see this as not just the unfinished business of that particular war, which started under, Bush too, but even during the Obama administration, the U.S. did not have a very clear policy on how to deal with being able to close this war and be able to move the region towards what one would call a progressive economy.
Yes.
During the Obama administration, you remember there was this look at how can we find moderate Taliban.
Yes, I remember. I remember that you wrote an absolutely fall down, roll on the floor, cry with both laughter and bitter tears at what a moderate Taliban was. It was
it was a sort of like looking for a moderate Nazi.
Yeah, that's right.
And, the thing that was missing from that policy was you cannot actually negotiate with the ones who've actually done crimes against humanity and genocide and femicide, etc. But they were desperately trying to split them off in some way from within that leadership, right. And actually that did not succeed.
No.
What could have succeeded was to have said, we're going to look, and that is still what can succeed, which is that you look at the actual policies of the individual as a leader as well as the community. Are his daughters going to school? Is his wife working? Is he willing to take the women in his family to a hospital, no matter whether the staff is male or female, if there's an emergency?
Right.
I mean, those are elements that on an individual, on a community basis, are the elements of a progressive modern society. Right. And, we got caught up in whether people have beards or whether they are wearing the hijab, etc. And really the West is still caught up in that.
I know.
Whether we are looking at, minority communities here and in Europe, or whether one is looking at the policy in the region. So what I sort of wanted to do with this latest trip, and I've just come back 2 weeks ago, was to take a kind of open-minded look at what I was seeing on the ground, and what was, there were some positives and there were some negatives. So on the positive front, some of the domestic efforts in these countries against terrorism and against sort of extremism being used for, attacks and bombs and this and that in marketplaces does seem to be working. It's horrible. It's done in a terrible, scorched earth way because it's the militaries at that local level who are doing it. Yeah. There are enforced disappearances. There is probably torture of people, but there does seem to have been a considerable reduction in the number of incidents. So you find people going to market again, you find people beginning to go about their commercial activities again. You clearly see that in Pakistan now, in the sense that the economy is doing well, and I could see the confidence in people coming back in being able to go back to their normal lives, including women. The thing that is negative is that part of this domestic, we're going to do it our way, does involve a more conservative ideology. So that you do see less tolerance of those who have a very secular Western lifestyle.
I see.
And you see much more of you have to cover your head when you're going out, or you have to be more careful with what you say in social media if you want to continue to do the work that you're doing on X.
I see.
And these are things which what I didn't get a handle on is whether this stuff is temporary, and as situations continue to improve, will this get better? The real weather vane on this is going to be the election in Pakistan. There's an upcoming election. The campaign season has already started.
Right.
Now, in the past, the very strong...
We hear a lot about the cricket star.
Yeah, the cricket star. Well, the cricket star is one of these interesting people. He's very Western in his own lifestyle in some ways, but he's also very conservative and aligned with the religious parties on a political sense. So this kind of dichotomy is something that you're going to see in the political arena. My own prognosis is that the cricket star will not win the general election. The general election will still be won by the current political party, which is a right-of-center party, which also caters sometimes to similar viewpoints. But that really what has failed in both countries and in the region in general, because it's a similar picture in India, is that the progressive secular left has really failed politically. And it's very similar to the decline that you see in Western societies, where they are kind of regurgitating to some extent the similar old platforms, the uninspiring candidates, the lack of clear economic agendas. And this is where I think the real challenge lies, that if we want to still maintain the values of Western liberalism, whether those are considered Western or Eastern, in my mind is one where I consider them global. We have to come up with a way of strengthening the economic agendas of that particular platform, because that is where these parties are failing. They're failing to deliver on that message and on the actual economic results.
Is one of the undercurrents for which economy sometimes becomes the metaphor, a resistance of the other. In other words, that upper class or upper caste males, in much of the world white, but it also is specific to any particular region where there's patriarchy, are propagating the notion that to give up control is to give up everything, and that the problem is all these others, whether it's dark-skinned people from the south of India or south of Pakistan, whether it's black people and women.
No, it's not racial.
And women. And women. I mean,
women. No, it's not racial in that region. What it is socioeconomic. So you do see that the religious right-wing parties are drawing from the poorer layers of society.
Yes, of course.
But they're not drawing so much from the rural poor. They're drawing from the new urban poor, the people who have moved to the towns and villages, who have lost whatever life and social networks they had in their rural areas, and who are then clinging to these new, almost fascist models of politics.
Well, that's pretty scary. That's pretty scary.
It is extremely scary, because these parties are, they are using the cloak of the faith and of religion, similar to the way the Nazis used the socialist ideology,
and the way Modi is using Hinduism in India as well,
and the same way that the Taliban and the Islamists are using this thing across Pakistan and Afghanistan. It's similar to the way really the white supremacy movement here is using that we must return to the evangelical values.
Of course.
So it's exactly that same playbook. The problem is that you don't have the solutions coming from the people we were largely educated elites who were running the left-wing politics.
I see. Shazia, we're close to running out of time.
I want to leave you with one line, which is that, part of what we did during the Cold War was that we killed all the communist parties in these regions. And as a result, we killed the left ideology that could have been moderated as it eventually became moderated in Europe.
What about something new? Is it possible that women might provide that new energy of the left and a new vision? The way it's beginning to happen here.
Not in the politics, because they've been getting killed at a very high rate, including, Benazir and people. But in the economy, I see that, definitely. Women are more than, in many fields, they are more than 50% now.
but not enough.
So in the economy, you see it.
Yeah.
But not in the politics.
Interesting. Well, let's hope it can spill. Well, that was a sobering report, but I'd always rather know the truth than bury my head in the sand, and I thank you for bringing it. Next time you go back into the region, for God's sake, let us know, and be careful, because you're an international treasure.
Thank you, Robin, and always wonderful to speak with you.
And it's time for one more quick break here at Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I'll be back in just a moment with those fighting words.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And we're back again for some fighting words. Ten years ago, the world's 5 largest companies by market capitalization were ExxonMobil, General Electric, Citigroup, Shell Oil, and Microsoft. Today, only Microsoft remains in the top 5, where it's been joined by Apple, Amazon, Facebook, and Alphabet, the parent company of Google. Yep, all tech companies, each dominating its corner of the industry. Amazon has a 74% share in the e-book market. Facebook and its subsidiaries Instagram, WhatsApp, and Messenger owns 77% of mobile social traffic. And Google has an 88% market share in search advertising. Welcome back to the early 20th century, when the great jurist Louis Brandeis argued for the necessity of eliminating monopolies, because he felt that the existence of large centers of private power in a democracy was dangerous to the vitality of a free people. We certainly witnessed this ourselves in the behavior of the largest banks in the 2008 financial crisis, and today in the roles that Facebook and Google played and still are defending in fake news. Brandeis generally opposed regulation, but only because he worried it could lead to the corruption of the relevant regulator. Instead, he advocated breaking up bigness, though he made an exception for so-called natural monopolies like telephone, water, and power companies, and railroads, where it makes sense to have one or a few companies controlling an industry. As the director emeritus of the University of Southern California's Annenberg Innovation Lab, Jonathan Taplin, has written, it may well be that companies today, Google in particular, have become natural monopolies by supplying an entire market's demand for service at a price lower than what would be offered by 2 competing firms. If so, isn't it time to regulate them, like public utilities? When AT&T was regulated, it was required to spend a fixed percentage of profits on research and development. So in 1925, AT&T set up Bell Labs to develop the next generation of communications technology and also to do research in physics and other sciences. Over the next 50 years, Bell Labs produced the transistor, the microchip, the solar cell, the microwave, the laser, and cellular telephony, plus 8 Nobel Prizes. That all benefited the public. Yet today, Facebook, Google, and Amazon squash innovation. Their platforms are the point of access to all media for the majority of Americans. While their profits have soared, revenues in newspaper publishing or the music business have, since 2001, fallen by 70%. Newspaper publishers lost over half their employees between 2001 and 2016. Billions of dollars have been reallocated from creators of content to owners of monopoly platforms. All content creators dependent on advertising have to negotiate with Google or Facebook as the gatekeepers, the sole lifeline between themselves and the world. Furthermore, rising supernormal returns on capital firms with limited competition is leading to a rising economic inequality. Now, we could start with some obvious regulations, although first, of course, we'd have to get rid of the Trump regime to do that. For example, monopolies are made by acquisition. Facebook buys Instagram and WhatsApp, Google buys DoubleClick, Amazon buys Audible, etc. So, for starters, these companies should not be allowed to acquire other firms, like Spotify or Snapchat. Another alternative is to regulate a company like Google as a public utility, require it to license out patents for a nominal fee, say for its search algorithms and other key innovations. A third alternative is to remove the so-called Safe Harbor Clause in the 1998 Digital Millennium Copyright Act. Nice name, Safe Harbor. Disastrous intent. It allows companies like Facebook and Google's YouTube to free ride on content produced by others. The reason there are 40,000 Islamic State videos on YouTube, many with ads that yield revenue for those who posted them, is that YouTube doesn't take responsibility for the content on its platform. It doesn't have to. Facebook, Google, and Twitter claim that policing their networks just too onerous, which is preposterous. They police their networks for child pornography quite well. Removing the safe harbor provision would also force social networks to pay for the content posted on their sites. Just one example. 1 million downloads of a song on iTunes would yield the performer and her record label about $900,000. 1 million in streams of that same song on YouTube would earn them about $900. That's appalling. Speaking of YouTube, it has more and more become a home for the politics and stars of the hard right. A guy calling himself Black Pigeon Speaks has 215,000 followers. His uploads have been viewed more than 25 million times. He believes in a global conspiracy of bankers led by Jews and thinks that women being allowed to do whatever they want, including choosing their own mates, is the death blow to Western civilization. Like the mega platforms Twitter and Facebook, YouTube hosts diverse communities. But like the much smaller Tumblr, which is dominated by combative left-wing politics, and 4chan, which is dominated by hard-right memes, YouTube posts just one dominant native political community. YouTube has quietly followed the path of talk radio's takeover by the hard right. That followed decades of deregulation and then opportunity. The rise of FM, the abandonment of AM by music stations, and the 1987 revocation of the Fairness Doctrine, a rule through which the FCC tried to negotiate and regulate a balance in content produced by licensed broadcasters. The result? Rush Limbaugh and his many brothers. YouTube is a reminder of how potent a medium can become while still appearing marginal to those who know little about it. As Paul Joseph Watson of InfoWars tweeted, "Twitter is a tiny echo chamber. I'm not sure the left understands the monumental ass-whipping being dished out to them on YouTube." Regulation of the public airways in the interests of the community, in the interests of fair and accurate reporting, and in the interest of balanced opinion that informs rather than dividing, debasing, and inciting to violence. This is, in fact, precisely what the framers had in mind when writing the First Amendment. I understand that government regulation can make some people nervous, yet we don't get nervous about high standards of accurate reporting at major newspapers, for instance, the 3 sources rule. And for decades, we didn't get nervous at the concept of community standards required by the FCC in the public interest. And it is blatant nonsense for tech giants with bulging pockets to claim they are innocent bystanders in the spread of political propaganda. We need to make absolutely clear to big tech and to our elected representatives and at the ballot box next year that if these companies will not regulate themselves, will not stop the poison for which they are the willing, eager delivery systems from reaching our ears and lives, then we want laws and standards that will regulate them instead. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter and be sure to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag Fighting Words. And that's it for today. This program is syndicated, but if you can't find the broadcast on a radio station in your area, you can always visit us at WMCLive.com for the show, plus the archive of all our previous episodes, and at iTunes, where you can stream, download, and subscribe to the show's podcast. Also, be sure to find WMC Live on Facebook and Twitter. And you can check out my website and blog at robinmorgan.net and find me on Facebook and Twitter, too. Portions of this program were taped earlier. Opinions expressed here do not necessarily represent the WMC. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. WMC President and Executive Producer of this program, Julie Burton, and our founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us, and don't forget to join us next week right here on Women's Media Center Live.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, tune your radio to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan on WMCLive.com. Talk radio with a brain.